this is James here with the Oracle Outlook for the week starting February the 25th, 2019. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining me for this week's video reading. I am so glad that you are here. This week we are wrapping up what I have dubbed Tarot Month because I'm celebrating my 20th anniversary of reading and working and studying with tarot. So I have been working with tarot all this month, each week working with a different deck in my collection, one that has had some significance to me as a part or a chapter or a phase of my tarot journey. So in the very first week of this month, I worked with the Tarot de Marseille because that is where I'm at in my tarot journey right now. I'm very excited to be working with historical decks, so that one is actually paving the way to a new era in my tarot journey, so I'm very excited about that. So that was in week 1. In week 2, I worked with the Universal Way Tarot, which has been one of my buddy decks that has been with me the longest stretch of time in my tarot journey. I've worked with the Universal Way Tarot for about 18 years now, so it holds a special place in my heart. So I worked with that in week 2. And then last week I worked with the Robin Wood Tarot, another one of my buddy decks, because they share, and I'm talking about they meaning the Universal Way Tarot and the Robin Wood, they share a collective memory, is that I got them both on the very same day. So I've had them both for the same amount of time, and I work with them equally. So they each hold a special place in my heart. So I was thinking, in light of that, I worked with decks that have had some significance in my journey through tarot, and so I thought, what do I want to work with this week? And so I came up with this deck. So for this week, rounding out this month of tarot, I'm working with the Arcana Tarot Playing Cards by Chris of Dianco of Dead on Paper. And your first thought might be, playing cards? That's not tarot. But this one is a tarot deck because it's called Tarot Playing Cards, but it has a significance in my experience with tarot in this regard. So I always say I'm not sure if I ever shared this story. I'm sure I may have. But after I had my initial card reading dream that got me into reading tarot, sometime after that, I had a dream in which I was in a school and I was in a classroom where they were showing a film. So now I'm dating myself. But back in the day when I was in school, we watched films using a film projector on a pull-down vinyl screen. So that was the setup because that's what I was familiar with from my school days. And so there was a film being played through the film projector. And so I'm standing in the room, and so the lights were out. And I turned to my right, and to my right there was a spotlight on the floor. So now the room was dark, right? The lights were out, but there was this huge spotlight on this floor. And where the spotlight was, there were houses of cards, like playing cards. You know, I've never done this, but people built houses of cards, right? So there were houses of cards on the floor to my right. So I walk over, and I start picking up the cards. And then after a while, I look in my hands at the cards I've collected, and they're a combination of tarot cards and playing cards. And so from my experience with dreams, as a person who works with these dreams, I've learned that dreams will progress or further along after an initial dream. So I kind of linked this dream to my previous dream where I was reading playing cards, right? That got me to read cards. So in a way, I looked at that as dream wisdom saying, okay, you did a good thing by picking up cards. But don't forget the playing cards, because at that point, I had totally forgotten about playing cards and gotten into tarot cards because I read that dream dictionary entry, saw that playing cards were related to tarot cards, and I just went off into tarot. So I think dream wisdom was saying, hold on, buddy, wait a minute. Don't forget the playing cards. And so I remembered that dream. And so bringing it back to this week's deck choice, when I saw Chris of Dianco's deck, it made me think of that dream, and I said, I have to have that deck because Dream Wisdom was making me feel like if I was going to pick up the cards, it was going to be a blending, or at least my way of reading the cards was going to be a blending of tarot and playing cards, right? So, cartomancy, right? So, I could consider myself to be a tarot reader, but I kind of language myself as a cartomancer because that is the term that's usually given to any card reader who works with systems outside of tarot, right? But I also have this wonderful book that I'm reading right now called Untold Tarot by Kathleen Matthews, and she calls readers in that book taromancers. Isn't that cool? So I'm a taromancer, right? Because of the way that I blend tarot and playing card cartomancy into my readings. So that is the reason for this week's deck choice. So again, we are working with the tarot playing cards, the Arcana Tarot playing cards by Chris of the Anko of Dead on Paper. And so now that I've set it up, let's get to the table and take a look at the cards that are going to make up this week's Oracle Outlook video reading. And here we are with the cards on the table, and I'm going to take the deck in hand. I'm going to take a few moments to shuffle the cards, as I do every week when I do these general readings. And I'm focusing on my usual intention for these weekly general readings, and that is that I'm looking to the cards for the information, the insight, the guidance that will be most helpful and beneficial as we move through the upcoming week. So I'm shuffling that into the cards. I'll do some this way too. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut the deck. And now I'm going to fan out the cards. And now I'm looking for the fan for 5 cards that are getting my attention. That's 1, 2, 3, number 4 is over here. We're looking for the 5th and final card, and I see it over here. Alright, so those are the 5 cards, and now I'm going to take the remainder of the deck up and put that off to one side. Now I'm going to take a moment to line the cards up. Alright. And so just as I normally do with a line of 5, or I should say more often than not, I'm going to start with the middle card. For me, the middle card will be the central issue, or something that we're being asked to focus on for the week going forward. So the card we have here is, here we have the 2 of Hearts. Okay, so here the focus for the week will be on relationships. The 2 of Hearts is, for me, the card that represents love. So, and I usually look at this as 2 hearts coming together. So this could be a relationship that it's in its beginning stages. It could be one of a romantic nature. So there is that. So 2 people getting together, the beginning stages of a romantic or love relationship. For some of us, it could just be a relationship in which we get to share our feelings. I look at this as the sharing of feelings, or any relationship in which there is an emotional connection, because the number 2 for me can represent sharing and connecting. So this is going to be a week, if it's not specifically for people getting together romantically and starting a relationship on that level, then it's about the ability to relate to other people this week. And in some relationships, we're going to be sharing how we feel, sharing our emotions. I think this is about emotional bonds, emotional connections, things of that nature. For some people, if it's not a love or romantic relationship, then it could be a relationship with a parent and a child, because for me, this card can represent children, and while I'm talking about that, this card can also represent pets. And so for some people, their relationship with their pets is just as significant and just as important as their relationship with their family members who are human beings, right? So again, this could be a romantic relationship that is going to take center stage, a relationship between a parent and child, a situation involving a person and his or her pet. In relationships, going with the idea that this is talking about relationships, this could also be a situation in which we're taking a look at our expectations regarding relationships, because sometimes for me this card can represent a couple who's expecting. So if it's not that, then it's about our expectations, playing on the idea of expecting, right, and expectancy. Then there may be something having to do with our expectations in relationships this week. And so it could go two ways, going with the two representing a two-way street, right? Something that can go both ways. It could be the expectations that we have on other people this week, as well as the expectations that other people are placing on us this week. So again, the focus here is on relationships. For some of us, it could be a love or romantic relationship. For others, it could be a relationship with a child. For others, it could be a relationship with a pet. But generally speaking, this is about emotional connections, emotional bonding, sharing of feelings, and taking a look at our expectations on others and others' expectations on us. So that is the focus card. So now let's take a look at the surrounding cards, because they're going to offer us more about the focus. Starting with the card on the far left. Here we have the Magician. So you may remember that the Magician card showed up last week in last week's reading. So I will start off by saying what I said last week in relation to this card being about a love relationship or a romantic relationship. Then the Magician, in that sense, is all about someone who is considered an ideal partner or spouse. So there is that, right? So it could be a relationship in which there's an expectation on the other party to be an ideal partner or spouse. So I'm seeing that as a possibility. It could be, again, with the Magician, where I talked about last week, that the Magician can represent skill and talents and abilities, something having to do with job and employment. Then this could be about a love for what someone does with their work. Another aspect of this card, I talked about it last week as well, is that this card represents the planet Mercury in astrology. And so that is the planet of the mind and of communication. So there may be something about expectations on a partner regarding communication in a relationship. It could also be saying too, like for a particular relationship, it's about working on the skill of communication within the confines or the context of that relationship. Now I will say this, if someone is expecting, playing on the idea that this could represent a couple who's expecting, then there may be something about seeing a specialist, because you may remember last week I talked about the Magician being a person who has some area of expertise or a specialty or specialization. And in the medical sense, if we're talking about pregnancy and expecting, then this would be seeing a specialist. So those are what I would say about the Magician in the moment. So again, the Magician can represent job and employment on one level and a love for work. It could also represent a relationship in which there's an expectation on the other party to be the ideal partner or spouse. Or that if someone's expecting, then it's about possibly seeing somebody who is a specialist. Right, and I talked about sharing feelings. I'm coming back to this card. If we're feeling like we want to share feelings with another person this week, emotional sharing, then this card is about putting all your cards on the table. I tend to look at the Magician as sometimes in certain depictions in some of the decks that I have, is that he has playing cards on the table. So that's a visual pun for putting all your cards on the table. So if someone is feeling inclined to do that, it's the purpose is so that we create a greater sense of emotional closeness or emotional bonding that way. So I'm seeing all that with the Magician. So now let's move on to the card next to the Magician and in between the Magician and the Two of Hearts. And we have, okay, so here we have two Major Arcana cards back to back. So for me, Major Arcana cards always carry more weight in a reading when they show up. So we have some significance. So there may be something significant going on just with the fact that we have two majors regarding a relationship or regarding emotional connections or relating to other people this week. The Chariot in between the two, the Chariot can represent direction. So there may be something having to do with the relationship and the direction that the relationship is moving into, right? For me, this represents direction and life direction, right? So there may be some emotional sharing, putting all your cards on the table, about the direction or the course of a particular relationship. Basically, the question is either where are we going, where are we headed, or where are we going from here? Like there may be a certain stage or level in the relationship that's reached, and now we're asking the natural question, where do we go from here? So now if someone is doing something regarding the work that they love, this is a very positive card, the Chariot, because it talks about career and success and recognition, right? The Chariot with the depiction of two horses can represent, progression, advancement, moving forward. And so again, it may be tied to a particular relationship and its progression. Now I will say this, I'm looking at the visual and I notice that one horse is looking in the direction of the Magician and the other horse is looking in the direction of the Two of Hearts. So there may be something about feeling being pulled in two different directions, right? And it's making me feel like, the visual makes me feel like the charioteer here is being pulled either something having to do with work in one direction and a relationship in another. And so it's like, how can I marry the two extremes, right? The black horse and the white horse represents two different extremes, right? And so for some person, it may be a matter of like, how can you manage your working life, your career, and maybe a relationship? Right? And for some person, if they're moving forward with their career, let's say, there may be a question about expectations. Remember, I said the Two of Hearts was about expectations. So there may be some question about expectations, like what is expected of me if I move into a new position, let's say. And I remember I talked about the Magician last week being about possibly seeking a promotion, right? Because this card can be about promotion. And this usually can represent promoting oneself or promoting one's skills, talents, abilities. So if somebody is thinking about moving up the ladder, so to speak, then there may be a question about what are the expectations. But I'm feeling for somebody in particular, there's going to be a struggle or a conflict possibly between work and personal life, and feeling like I'm being pulled in two different directions. So I'm seeing that with the first three cards. Now let's look at the card next to the Two of Hearts on the opposite side. And here we have yet another Major Arcana card. So now we have 3 out of 4 cards being majors. We have the Magician, the Chariot, and now the World. So the World has been showing up a lot in my readings these days. And so the chief message of this card for me is that it represents completion, the successful completion of a cycle, chapter, or phase in one's life. Right, so there may be a matter of moving something along, progression, to completing it, the World. Now, as I'm saying that, both of these cards are travel cards. So there may be something in the literal sense about somebody doing something regarding travel, or that in the metaphorical sense, we're taking a look at the journey through life, making some progress with a certain stage or phase or chapter in life. Now, I know I talk about work and business a lot when I do my readings, but all three of these cards can be tied to work. I'm talking about the Magician, the Chariot, and the World. For me, this card can represent career path. So somebody may be doing something that's going to help them progress or advance on their career path. And with this card can represent certain stages. So this could be a move. And I talked about that either last week or the week before. Somebody may be contemplating moving or relocating. That's connected to work or career. And they're doing so because where they're looking at going, there could be, I'm getting the idea like a whole new world will open up. So I'm seeing that. So the idea is about opening a whole new world, right? Another thing that somebody could actually be retiring from work, I see this as graduation. So if somebody was in school, this would be about graduation. If somebody's been on the job for a long time and wanting to make a career change, they could be going into quote unquote retirement with their current place of work or business. But my first thing would be travel. And if there is a move, this is a move that would imply distance. And there may be a situation if someone is wanting to move, because I'm seeing this in my mind, if someone is wanting to move up the ladder or wanting to advance with their career, there may be an expectation for them to move a great distance. So this could be, depending on the nature of the company or corporation this person is involved in, this could be either they're moving to another branch in another state, or if they have an international business, then they could be leaving one country for another. But whatever this is, there's some expectation that each party involved has to be on the same page, because this is about feeling the same way or the feeling being mutual. And now that I'm saying that, let's change this too. There's another possibility here that if somebody is making changes with their career, they're going to have to keep in mind how that's going to affect or impact maybe a personal relationship. So I'm seeing that as a possibility as well. Right? But the world can represent successful completion of a chapter, phase, or experience in life. It could also represent a triumph, victory, and success, like I said already. Or that a situation is being experienced and it's going to result in a new level of awareness. So I'm seeing that with the Chariot and the World. So now let's take a look at the final card, rounding out the line this week, and we have yet another major arcana card. So for some people, this is going to be a very significant week because the major arcana cards highlight important issues or events, right? So there's something very significant going on for some people this week. Justice at the end can represent an important decision needing to be made, right? And here's very important. So I talked about a couple of scenarios, right? Some that involve other people, right? Justice in that case would be about making an important decision that's in the best interest, the highest good for everyone involved, right? So this could be needing to look at all possible sides and angles and facets of a situation, right? This is about being fair, just, impartial, right? Because justice is blindfolded in the image. So now the obvious thing here too is that somebody could be doing something in the field of law, because justice is a legal card. So there may be some legal aspect or legal component to it, if it's not about somebody who's actually working in law. like either being a lawyer or a judge, something along those lines. And if it's not legal, then this could also be political. So somebody may be wanting to advance their career on the world stage, something having to do with politics. And I will say this too, because justice, if I mirror the cards, justice on this end and the magician on this end can also represent somebody who works in law. Now remember, I talked about the magician representing expertise and specialization. Well, there are different types of law. So somebody may be specializing in a particular type of law. Right? So I'm seeing that. But somebody may be wanting to advance their career or change something, or, seek more visibility or exposure in that regard. Now, I also talked about the successful completion of a cycle stage chapter. Someone may be contemplating, if we go with the idea that this is about relationships, then justice can sometimes represent legal matters regarding a relationship. So now, I talked about a personal, intimate relationship. Well, this could be successfully completing that, and so this could be divorce, if we go with a legal procedure, and that would make sense going with the other card on this side being a partner or spouse, possibly, and needing to work on something having to do with communication, so there may be something about that. So somebody may be successfully completing that stage in their lives and being able to move on from there. Another possibility here is that somebody may be doing something, I said something regarding children, so there may be something of a legal nature about moving something forward that may be regarding a child or a pet even. And if people are splitting up, if that's what justice is in this regard, splitting up, then this card would suggest here, what are the expectations about that? Or how can we share the child? Remember, now this is in the middle, so this would be about sharing. Sharing the child equally, sharing the pet equally. What are the expectations going into that situation in terms of the child being the focus? Or now remember, if people are splitting up here, let's say, then it's about remembering that the child is still the focus, right? As the relationship shifts and changes, that's the thing that the parents share. And so the focus always needs to be placed on the child. And some people may be regarding a pet the same way. I've seen reports on the news where that's a thing now in the legal system about cases where they have two people go to court to work out agreements regarding the custody of a pet. So that is a thing, right? So I'm seeing those as possibilities here. But with justice at the end, it makes me feel like there's going to be an important decision that needs to be made. It could very well have to do with the obvious, something having to do with legal, the law. And if that's the case, it's about making sure that the decision that's going to be made is in the best and highest good and interest of all the parties involved. And so what I normally do is I take into account direction. So I notice that the world is looking at justice. So there may be something about the successful completion, again, of something having to do with law or something legal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to widen out the camera because I've been doing this kind of trick or technique with the card. So I'll show you. So we have, I'm going to widen this out as I do it. So what we have is we have the magician looking to this side, right? Looking to the left. So I'm going to draw a card and place it here. And then we have the charioteer looking at us. It's a front-facing card as well as justice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a card and put one above it and below it. See what more do we need to know surrounding the chariot. And the same thing with justice. So since I mentioned the magician first, we'll do that first. So what I'm doing is I'm shuffling the cards. and I'm asking, what more do we need to know about the magician? And I always ask, like, what is the magician facing? And another idea just came to me regarding the magician, so I'll tell you after I pull the card. So I'm going to cut the deck, and hopefully you can see some of that. So now I'm going to fan out the cards, and I'm going to pick a card. And we'll put that in front of the magician, like so. And I'm going to take the remainder of the deck up. All right, so now we have the card that is in front of the magician. So now let's take a look at the card. And here we have, okay, so here we have the Three of Hearts. So there's a couple of things that I want to say here. So the first thing is that we notice that we have 4 trump cards, or 4 major arcana cards, and 2 cards from the suit of hearts. So again, we have this carryover about feelings, emotions, relationships, because hearts represents it as a suit for me. And here we have increase. We went from a 2 to a 3. So there's an increase of emotional energy here. If I go with my meanings for the Three of Hearts, one thing here in particular is that the magician, representing job and employment, facing the Three of Hearts, this is a card that can represent a small promotion. So again, we have this carryover about somebody wanting to progress and advance and move forward in their career, right? And needing to make an important decision about that. So that is a natural thing here. If we're talking about a relationship reaching its natural stage and conclusion, a completion, we're wrapping something up, and it may have to do with something of a legal matter like a divorce, right? Then this card would suggest that there was something having to do with the possibility of a third party. For me, this card can represent a love triangle, right? So there is that to consider as well. And so this could be the thing that precipitated this situation being resolved, right? Now, for me personally, the cards are liking what I'm doing because the Three of Hearts is my card for cartomancy. And with the magician looking this way, the magician represents talent, skill, and ability. So this would be talent and skill, ability regarding cartomancy. So I'm seeing that here too. But whatever the situation is, there's going to be growing and developing feelings and emotions around it. And this could just be another aside. I talked about the fact that there are 4 trumps here in the, or major arcana cards in the line. The Three of Hearts can represent taking time to look at the spiritual side of life. So there may be something that somebody is doing regarding their spirituality, and this would make sense. And the Two of Hearts in that case would be about a relationship or a connection with the divine, however you language the divine. But there may be, for some person, something growing and developing with that. So now, what the idea that I got was I talked about putting a card above and below the Chariot and Justice. I'm also going to do that with the Magician because I noticed that the Magician is also looking up. So we have as above, so below. So let's do that. So now I'm focusing on that as my question and intention. Same thing. I don't know if you can see it. Now I'm cutting the cards. I'm going to pull a card for as above, another card as so below. Hopefully that will be in the frame. I think it is. All right. And again, I'm going to pick the cards up, put them to one side. Okay, so now let's look at the card above. And here we have the Page of Diamonds. So the Page of Diamonds for me can represent news or messages because this is card that represents news or messages, and it's usually news or messages, and this may be about money or finances. That's my first go-to. It could also be thinking about some sort of course of study. If somebody is wanting to advance their career, there may be some learning. So that could be learning in the literal sense where they're actually going to school, because this card for me can represent the student or the scholar. So there may be something having to do with that. But it may be something about focusing. This card is also about focus and concentration, where somebody is focusing and concentrating on moving their career forward. This card would suggest on some level somebody may be working in the information industry, because I look at this as valuable information. But somebody may be at a place with their career where they want to practically apply what it is that they have learned, because this card represents not just acquiring knowledge, but practically applying it. So I'm seeing that with the Page of Diamonds. And so now let's take a look at the card beneath. And here we have Temperance. Okay, so Temperance, remember now, Temperance also showed up in last week's reading. So I love seeing this. But in this particular case, here we have something where we're blending something, we're combining something. So this, again, would be regarding job and employment, possibly. We are blending something, we are merging something, we are creating something out of two diametrically opposed things, because this card can represent bringing elements together, creating something new. This could also be, if somebody is thinking about this, there may be a need for patience, because this is underneath the table. So regarding the work itself, there may be something about being patient. This card is about patience, moderation, balance. Now, it could also be, too, this could be another signal where I talked about here about somebody who is needing to kind of balance between working life and home life or personal life. This card would be saying the same thing. It's like, how can you create balance? Right? Now, I will say this, and I have to put my disclaimer here that I am not a medical professional, but if somebody is wanting to do some work or put some energy or attention into having a child, there may be something about seeing a specialist. And here we may be considering either an experimental type of program or something having to do with a blending of the traditional medicine and alternative medicine, because I see these with that particular thing. And this card knights to the Two of Hearts. So there is something about that. So again, regarding a specialist, this could be seeing somebody who does holistic health work like I talked about last week. But it may be, again, that we are seeing a specialist and we may be learning or getting some information regarding some sort of experimental treatment. So I'm seeing that as well. So now I'm just taking a look in terms of direction. So it's very interesting that the angel on Temperance is looking this way. So I said I was going to draw a card here. And the page is looking this way. So the first thing I will do is I will draw a card for the page. And so what I love about doing these types of readings is that you just never know where they're going to go. So again, I'm asking what more do we need to know about the news or message that the page is delivering? All right, so I see this card for the page. We'll put that there. All right, so now let's take a look to see what more do we need to know about the news or messages from the page. And here we have, okay, so first thing I will say is that we have the Moon card. So we have another Major Arcana card. So the Moon card for me is a card that can represent confusion, uncertainty, and bewilderment. So there may be some needing to learn about something in which we're confused. There may be some confusion, but we learn some information that will help with the confusion and the uncertainty, right? Or it could be like there's some sort of news or message that is communicated to us, going back to this card being about communication, but it's not clear. Now, I will say this, again, if we go with the idea that I'm talking about, this idea with somebody who's doing something around a pregnancy, then there may be something having to do with one's menstrual cycle, because the moon card for me can represent menstrual cycles, right? So there may be something having to do with ovulation. And again, I'm saying this not being a medical professional, not being an OBGYN or anything like that, but I'm just saying what I see in the cards, and so that is another carryover, right? So I'm seeing that the moon card is also a card that can represent heightened sensitivity. So if we go with the idea that the hearts are talking about feelings and emotions, now remember, all the other cards on the table besides the page of diamonds are major arcana cards, and these are two from the suit of hearts. So we have something on an emotional level, right? We have something where the feelings are growing and developing, right? With that, then the moon card being above the three of hearts talks about heightened sensitivity. So for our interactions with other people, there may be either a particular relationship or relationships generally speaking where one or two things are happening. With the moon card, we're being asked to be very mindful of how other people can trigger us this week on an emotional level, because this card for me can represent emotional triggers, right? So there is that to consider, because again, feelings are going to be growing and developing, so you want to be mindful of that. Be very mindful of who and what is going to be possibly emotionally triggering you this week. Another thing with the moon card is also coming up when we're being asked to consider what it is that we are fearful of, and this is time to confront our fears, right? So there may be something that you learn and it produces a fear response, and instead of staying rooted in fear, ask yourself, okay, so the fear has come up, and it's coming up so I can acknowledge it first, because the dog and the wolf on the card are howling at the moon, so they are recognizing the moon, right? So it wants to be acknowledged, and when you acknowledge it, it's saying, I'm seeing it because I'm willing to do something about it at this point in time. But there may be something having to do with pregnancy here, because I'm seeing this about menstrual cycles. And so that may be where the medication comes in here. It may be something that's going to help regulate that, or, again, me not knowing anything clearly about that, but that's what's coming to me, something that may help with that. Because I'm seeing temperance as about flow, so there's something about that. That's what's coming to me. Now, if we're talking about emotionally triggering relationships or situations, then temperance is all about compromise and reaching a state of compromise. And that brings me back to what I talked about here with justice and a possible legal situation, right, regarding some kind of divorce, possibly, or resolving a relationship. That could just be a matter of, like, if there are terms that we need to come to some agreement about, it's about reaching some level of compromise. All right, so now the next thing I'm going to do is now we're going to draw 2 cards for the Chariot. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and cut the cards. And now I'm fanning them out, and I'm asking, what do we need to know about what surrounds the Chariot? So I'm looking for 2 cards. Card that goes above, and I like this one for card that goes below. All right, taking a look at the card above. Okay, so here we have the Jack of spades. So now notice the first thing that jumps out at me is we have the horse symbolism repeating here. So here we have again the situation about progress, movement, moving forward, travel, that kind of thing. It's making me feel, if I read these cards across the top, here we have the moon, where I talked about confusion or uncertainty. The page of diamonds, news or information that's valuable, that's learned, maybe as a result of the confusion or the uncertainty, right? Or that we learn about something from a place of uncertainty. But since the page is looking this way, it may produce uncertainty or confusion, right? This information. And then as a result of that, we investigate. This is one of my investigation cards, the Jack of Spades. So this is about looking into something further, right? So there is that. It could also be, too, somebody wants to move on from a situation, because sometimes this card for me can represent a hasty or sudden exit. So it could be a matter of maybe looking into ways to exit a situation. Now, this is also another legal matter card. So again, we have this idea about maybe something for somebody having to do with the law, something having to do with a legal matter, because not only does this card can represent, getting a lawyer or getting a lawyer involved, it can also represent an investigator. But with the symbology here, it's about me thinking that somebody is wanting to move forward, either in the literal sense, literal movement, or metaphorically. But there may be, because it's a spade, there may be some challenge with that. This card can be about facing challenges. So it's making me feel like if somebody wants to move forward, it's about facing the challenges that go with that. And again, it would be like if you're confronting some kind of fear, then that would make sense with this as well. Now let's look at what's below. Here we have, oh, yeah, wow. So here we have the Devil card at the bottom. So we have another Major Arcana card. So the Devil card can come up when, a couple of things. There may be some misunderstanding. This card can represent a misperception, misunderstanding, that kind of thing that we need to clear up, right? So that would make sense, and especially with the Devil and the Moon card together in the same reading, that represents something not being entirely clear. But the Devil card, in a good sense, can represent a long-term commitment, being involved in something for the long haul, right? So this card coming up is asking us, if we're talking about relationships and forming a relationship, then this card here is giving us a heads up to be very careful about the agreements that we enter into, right? Because this card for me can represent a binding agreement, right? So it's about, and if it's a legal contractual agreement, now with the Devil card, it could be about something that's legally binding. If that is the case, and it's, again, I talked about the terms of the agreement and compromise, possibly with the Temperance card facing the Devil card, then here we have the possibility of, it's very important that you know the terms of the agreement, because it's making me think of the phrase that the devil's in the details, right? So again, the Devil card could represent a long-term agreement or commitment, binding agreement. It could also be about wanting to investigate something further before going forward, because you don't want to make a mistake. The Devil card is about error consciousness, right? And sometimes I'm seeing this here. It may be you want to investigate something further before you just jump into it. Temperance would be about getting your feet wet, dipping your toes slowly into something. The Jack of Spades usually talks about wanting to just jump in something, and sometimes we jump in too hastily, too sudden, too quickly. And we don't want to do that, because the Devil card is about possibly making a mistake if we move too quickly, right? But these cards will make me feel, too, it's going back to this, it's very important about getting information, especially if you are confused or you are uncertain about something. Before you go forward with it, make sure that you know exactly what you are getting yourself involved in. Because the Devil card can sometimes represent something that you can't get out of as quickly as you got into it, right? Now, the other thing here, because it's on the bottom, if we're talking about the Chariot being life direction, then this card would be about becoming aware of whatever you consider to be blocks, challenges, limitations, restrictions, all those things that you have going on in your consciousness that keep you from moving forward or taking any kind of action. Right? And would you be willing to confront them and learn from them? Right? So that is this column here. So now let's do justice. And as I'm saying that, one other thought is coming to me. So I will stop and say this. When I get the devil card and justice in the same reading, and since justice came first, I will say this. For somebody in a relationship, if you have been accused of any wrongdoing, there may be some vindication here. Or somebody who has had some sort of injustice done to them is going to get some sort of vindication, because justice and the devil card represent vindication from wrongdoing. So that could go one or two ways. Either you have been accused and you will be vindicated, or that you have been treated unfairly and that will be vindicated. But I'm seeing that one or two ways. Okay, so now let me go back to shuffling the cards and asking what more do we need to know about the cards that surround justice. All right, so now one more time, I'm going to go ahead and cut the cards. Fanning them out. And I'm looking for two. One to go above justice and one to go below. All right. So now let's take a look at the card above justice. And here we have the Sun card. Okay. So what I talked about here about maybe the possibility of somebody getting some kind of vindication, the Sun card is the best card in the deck. For me, this card can represent clarification. It could represent illumination. It could represent enlightenment. It could also represent happiness and personal freedom. So this idea that somebody, maybe if they're feeling like they're trapped, they're stuck in a situation, they're somehow going to gain a sense of personal freedom, and it may come through a legal process. Now, this card is also a money card. The Sun can represent money, so there may be some sort of gain or attainment on a monetary level, and that brings back to what I talked about over here with the Page of Diamonds, and I said it could represent news or messages pertaining to money, so we have that possibility here again. We also have something having to do with a child again. So there may be something again, because I talked about that with the Two of Hearts, something having to specifically do with a child. Right? And it may be about making sure that we are doing the right thing for a child. So now let's take a look at the card that's below justice. And here we have, oh my goodness. Okay, so now here we have the High Priestess at the bottom. So again, when I see justice and the High Priestess together, they also can form something having to do with the law, just like the Magician card over here. High Priestess can represent the same thing, right? For me, I tend to think with the High Priestess, we are in the midst of getting something wrapped up. Typically, she's holding a scroll. So for me, the scroll is a visual pun for something getting wrapped up. There may be something having to do with, again, if we're talking about a decision needing to be made, then when the High Priestess comes up, it represents there's a need to wait. And that would make sense with Temperance. Temperance was about patience, remember? There's a need to wait for further information. You do not have all the information you need to have that would allow you to make the best and possible choice. She always represents two things for me: a wait and see approach and a waiting for further information. right? So there is that to consider, and that would make sense again, going back to the Page of Diamonds way over here where we talked about valuable information, right? But for someone, when I get this card, again, if there is a legal matter where we're resolving a relationship, like I said about divorce, then this card would be, again, because somebody has been disappointed in love. Again, we have the hearts, 2 of hearts, 3 of hearts. The High Priestess can represent disappointment in love. But she also can represent learning to become independent. So somebody may be resolving a relationship in which they get to move on, and the lesson that they have learned is about establishing a greater sense of independence, and that would make sense where I talked about the sun being about personal freedom. Now I will say this, for some spiritually minded people, the High Priestess and the moon can represent intuition, being led and guided by your intuition. So it could be if there is a decision needing to be made as you're waiting for the information, if you actually need concrete information, tangible information, a hard copy, hard documentation, going back to the page here. Until that happens, the High Priestess and the moon are asking you to trust your intuition, trust your inner knowing. And for some people, again, I'm just going to keep this, put this out there. If somebody is doing spiritual work, there's a lot of cards that suggest that. There may be somebody who is learning something, learning to apply a talent or skill or ability. Remember, the magician can represent channeling. So there's somebody who may be doing some channeling work. And we have the magician with the Temperance card, which is the angel card again. So we have somebody who may be doing angel work. We may have somebody who's doing psychic work. The moon and the High Priestess can represent psychic ability, psychic talents. It could also be somebody is studying the metaphysical or the esoteric, because the High Priestess can represent esoteric wisdom and knowledge. And if you're doing that, you're doing it in a way that you want to apply that knowledge to your life. And then if that's the case here, going with the spiritual aspects, the Temperance card can represent becoming more spiritually adept. And then the World card can represent a spiritual career and becoming some kind of spiritual practitioner if you not are already doing so. And then the Chariot and the World would be about you moving that forward and gaining a greater sense of visibility. So that is how I would look at the entire reading this week. And on that note, I will go ahead and wrap up this week's Oracle Outlook. I'm James Himm Mitchell, and as I close, I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me for this week's reading, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you in our next video reading together. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day, and I'm hoping that you have a very tarot-tastic week. Take care.